So here we are interested now in supervision group leadership and applying some of those Tavistock approaches to group leadership to actually group supervision. So that's what we're doing. So the first of all, sort of general principles of psychodynamic leader tasks. All right, so just bearing in mind sort of overall principles as such. So we want to help members say what's on their minds. We want to think about the timing and pacing of our intervention. I'll say a little bit more about that later, but flipping down to the bottom there, we want to think about, we want to wait. Okay, we want to listen to the group, we want to listen to the individuals and listen to ourselves before we intervene. So too much intervention, I would say, is fairly disabling for a group. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. Okay. So then clarifying feelings and anxieties that underlie group members' preoccupations and behaviours. And we'll talk about that in relation to group intervention. So that might be something like acknowledging the loss of a group member the week before, and now the group members are expressing some sadness but haven't overtly expressed it yet about the group member. That might be a fine example really of sometimes articulating something for the group that's sort of just below the surface, but as the minute they hear it, there's a sort of, yeah, oh yes, that's true, you know, the loss of Sarah has affected me and I'm feeling it, sort of thing. Identifying group defences, that sounds a little bit of psychobabble, doesn't it, against anxiety, feeling and conflict, and it's much more about simply putting back the feelings that you're noticing in the group that perhaps remain unspoken because it might be a bit challenging. So for example, in the departure of a member of the group, group members might be wondering, could the leader have done more to keep the person in the group, for example, and why didn't they? And so for the group leader to express that might be useful and enable the group to say a bit more about how they're feeling about that, and they might want to sort of challenge the leader or ask about that. Feeding back at observations about anxieties and defences to the group, inviting the group to do likewise. So as one does as a leader, sort of acknowledge, say, the loss of a group member, invite other members to say, you know, is there something else, you know, apart from, you know, getting them to own how they feel about the loss of the member. They might also have other observations to share, and for the task of the leader is to help people to understand that their observations are welcome, you know, because the more observations that can be had, the more the group has to think about, and it's the richer group for it as a result. So the key thing for the group leader to bear in mind when working with groups, be it a therapy or a supervision group, is that you see everything as group-centered. The group comes first, the group comes over and above the individual. So if you're following a proper Tavistock Bion-esque model, then all offerings that you put back to the group are about the group as a whole in some way. Okay, so that what we said earlier about for example, the impact of one person leaving the group and the group feeling a sense of loss. We might have another theme such as different people talking about their sort of social anxieties, and somebody might have mentioned coming back after COVID and wondering what it's going to be like in a sort of real group as opposed to a virtual group. So the leader may express some of those, then listening to the anxieties as something about the tension between and the social confidence in being in a real group versus a virtual group. And maybe something about, you know, what role do I take in this group, or how do I reach out in this group, so that you're offering back a sort of central theme, as it were, to the group for each individual to turn over and think about, how does that apply to me in my mind? You know, how confident am I feeling in a virtual group? Am I feeling more confident in that sort of group than in a real group, or vice versa? And no rights or wrongs, just to be aware really of those kinds of tensions. And again, relational conflicts, what do we mean by that? So it might be that there might be some sort of a dispute going on in the group, and the thing to then do is to invite the group to comment on what might that mean as symbolizing a tension in the group. So Rachel might say one thing and Bert another, and you know, it might be seen as conflictual. So what is this saying about the current tensions in this particular group that are going on, and where are other people, where do they lie in that scenario? So that again, we're inviting the group to come in and democratize really those feelings and distribute them, spread them out a bit, rather than all being located in Rachel or Bert and the overt conflict that appears to be going on there. So the leader does maintain that strictly group-centered stance, and that's incredibly important, and that's what we want to see happening in the group. So, yes, coming back to making that distinction really between a therapy group, for example, and a supervision group, say, so that in the therapy, clearly the therapy group, the objective is to perform therapy, whereas in the supervision group, our objective is to learn about what's going on as it relates to the task of supervision. So when I'm in group supervisor role, I may spend some time observing the group dynamic and then invite the group to think about the group process, the tensions, and what these might be representing for the group as a whole, or the case that we're under discussion. I've got a diagram to show you in a second about that. Okay, so in general terms then, we can also notice, going back to those the Bion theory about basic assumptions and overt task. So for example, how is the task? You might ask to yourself, well, how is the task of supervision going? Are we making kind of quite good progress? Or are we a bit stuck? Is it a bit turgid? You know, is it perhaps not progressing as well as some other groups that I've run? Now, sometimes that can just be the character of the group. But sometimes it might be something else, and of course you'd explore these things in your own supervision, needless to say. And if you're continuing to say walk through treacle or mud, then there might be something interpersonal going on in the group that may be worthy of exploration. If it's getting in the way of the task of supervision, then as group supervisor, your task is to look at that first of all in supervision, and then probably in the group. Okay. And then we have the question about, you know, do I intervene or don't I? What are the reasons for intervening? What are the reasons for not intervening? So as I mentioned before, and I mean, there's quite a good saying that goes, never do for the group what they can do for themselves. So there is always a case for waiting and not just jumping in. So waiting gives you a chance to sort of see what themes are going on in the group, and see what's happening in the group, so that you get and give yourself some breathing space really to see the dynamics. Now, why shouldn't I intervene in a group? Well, there might be all kinds of reasons for that, of course. So you're, as I say, remaining silent to get a sense of what themes are happening and get a sense of what's going on. Now, you may be drawn into inviting the group if there's some sort of conflict or tension going on. You might not know the answer, and that might keep you quiet, which might look like avoidance to members of the group. So you have to think about that, the cost of not intervening, and is that avoidance? Or you might be struggling with, well, I can't really say anything until I know exactly what it is, or I think I know exactly what it is, and actually you don't always know what it is. Quite often you really don't. So But a way of coming in might be to invite the group to notice, notice there's a tension between Bert and Rachel. And I wonder if the group might sort of think about, what does that signify? What might that symbolize for them? What are people's thoughts? So asking it in a sort of puzzled, neutral, curious way, in a non-judgmental way, of course, giving people the chance to, taking the heat out of Rachel and Bert, and giving the group a chance to sort of sit back and think about, oh, what does this mean? I hadn't thought about it as symbolizing something for the group, but now that that's been put out there, let me have a think about it. All right, so there's a number of, I think, you could probably make a list of reasons why you should intervene and reasons why you shouldn't. So lots to think about there, and I don't want to give you too much. I'd rather invite you really to sort of make a list, and then maybe discuss that with colleagues. So yes, so then I put up a little picture here that I developed myself, which is to do with, okay, so let's say you're spotting now, your group supervisor, and you're spotting that there is some sort of conflict or tension that seems to be emerging in the group. Now, I'd put to you that there are probably two reasons. There could be other reasons, but mostly I would say there are probably two main reasons as to why that's coming up, okay? One is that it's the supervision group dynamic and something going on interpersonally between group members, that's being symbolized by perhaps a couple of people in dispute, and that needs the supervisor may need to stop. I mean, maybe complete the supervision and then stop, maybe make an arrangement to at the next meeting, or it depends when these things come into the discussion, but may need to contract with the group to say, now look, let's have a look at our relationships this week. Let's have a look at our process. It's probably about time we reviewed our process, and give some serious space for the group to talk about how they're feeling with each other, how they're feeling toward the leader. And as leader, it's very important that you really invite them to sort of almost try out challenging you first, before each other, so that they can feel safe enough to challenge. And it's going to be the leader first who needs to model being robust enough to be challenged. So that's the green bit on the top, the green things, then looking at supervision group dynamics. Or the other reason for the tension might be because it's to do with the case that's coming into the group. So somebody has presented perhaps a family or a couple that's in dispute about something, within the case, and suddenly group members are in dispute about something, to do with the case. So, there we have a parallel process potential. And particularly if you're looking at the two members and thinking, well, they don't usually sort of dispute each other, and so it's coming in now. So that's even more of an argument to indicate that this might be to do with the case that's being presented rather than it being a dynamic of the group itself. So we never know, of course, the real answer, and sometimes there's plenty of overlap. But again, as group supervisor, you can think about, even over the long term, not just in one group itself, but over the longer term, what are the themes going on in my supervision group? What might be the interpersonal themes, the tensions and so on, so that you're aware then of where you think the tensions are lying and what needs to be explored as part of the group process, and you have a sense of that, as well as, on a case-by-case basis, the stuff that's coming into the group, and that the group may enact in some way. And it's always useful, of course, that the group does enact it in some way, and are kind of almost encouraged to, in a sense, because then we're going to get a real sense of what might be happening out there in the case. And this is where, again, it's so helpful to have a group. So the group and the members of the group are likely to be getting hold of all sorts of countertransference presented by the client to the supervisor, that the supervisor is now brought into the room. and so that's really rich. If the group can explore that, they may start acting it out in some ways, and also just be invited to share, their feelings about what's happening, and we'll begin to get a really rich perspective on what's happening for the individual. So not too much more to say here then, really, just some sweeping up points to note, really. So there are differences in other psychodynamic models about the group versus the individual focus. The Caroline Garland kind of model would think about balancing the individual and the group, and sometimes doing group interventions, sometimes doing individual interventions. The group analytic model would tend to be more individual focused and also socially focused. Sometimes also somebody might be enacting something in the group that's sort of heavy projection based, but that's really quite disturbing. So again, I mean, the point there is for the leader not to collude with the group with that, which can be tempting in some cases. It's very important for that not to happen, and to use as much of your own supervision as possible when you feel something powerful like that happening. And then the ideas about keeping records and keeping process notes, which is a kind of personal choice in group supervision. You may choose then to keep some notes about cases, and also a few notes about how the group seem to be functioning together. So that's, I think, concludes really the leadership focus. I'm going to stay with the Bion-esque model for this module that we're doing, though, and encourage the group to take that as a focus, because I really do think the group-centered focus for us as group supervisors is very helpful, and that it invites all group members to participate in what's happening, and it takes the view that everything that happens in the group is about the group. It's not about individuals first, it's about the group first, but that we all connect with it in some way as individuals. Thank you.